Hey everyone, welcome back. Ready to dive into some seriously thought-provoking stuff? We're tackling Tolstoy's The Kingdom of God is Within You today.
Yeah, this one's a heavyweight, for sure.
Definitely not light reading, but that's why we're here, right? To unpack these complex ideas about nonviolent resistance, especially within a Christian context, which is what Tolstoy was all about.
Absolutely. And it's fascinating how relevant these ideas still feel today, even though he was writing in late 19th century Russia.
Right, like, talk about a different world. So, to set the stage for anyone unfamiliar with Tolstoy's work, he was a bit of a revolutionary, challenging the status quo, even the church.
Oh, totally. His main argument in this book is that true Christianity can't exist alongside any kind of violence. It's a pretty radical stance.
And he doesn't hold back, even calling out the Russian Orthodox Church, and really any Christian denomination for that matter, for not actually living up to this principle.
He basically says they're all talk and no action. Like you say you follow Christ's teachings, but then you're cool with violence, not so fast.
Exactly. And he really zeroes in on the Sermon on the Mount, the whole turn the other cheek thing. He's saying, if you're serious about following Christ's teachings, even when dealing with societal wrongs, the eye for an eye mentality just doesn't cut it.
And what's so interesting is how he dismantles the arguments people use to justify violence. Like, some critics tried to say, well, non-resistance only applies to personal offenses, not when it comes to defending society as a whole.
But, like, you can't possibly be expected to just stand by and let bad things happen.
Right. And Tolstoy saw right through that. He called it a total misinterpretation of what Christ was saying.
Trying to have it both ways, basically. And then there were those who just thought he was being naive. Like, come on, Tolstoy, modern civilization has moved past these simplistic ideals.
Yeah, and he had a really sharp counter to that. He saw this whole obsession with technological advancement and material wealth, which many people saw as progress, as a distraction from true spiritual growth.
He wasn't afraid to call it like he saw it.
Not at all. There's this line in the book that I think sums up his view perfectly. They worship the form and despise the substance.
It's like he's saying we've become so fixated on the outward appearance of things, the stuff, that we've totally lost sight of what truly matters.
Exactly. And he didn't just stop there. He also digs into how states themselves perpetuate violence, often in ways we don't even realize.
And that story he tells about the governor of Oral always sends chills down my spine.
It's such a powerful example, right? This governor, he's ordering these brutal punishments, and he's totally unfazed by it. It's just business as usual.
It's like he's become desensitized to the suffering he's causing.
And that's exactly what Tolstoy wants us to see. It's this chilling illustration of how systems of power can blind us to our own humanity, to our own better nature.
It's kind of terrifying when you think about it, isn't it? Like, how often are we just going along with things, not even questioning the systems that are in place? But then if this is the reality Tolstoy paints, where do we even go from here?
Yeah.
Did he offer any solutions, any hope for a less violent world?
He did. And it all hinges on this idea of a dual awakening, individual and societal. He truly believed in the power of individual awakening, people waking up to the truth of Christ's teachings and choosing love over violence, even if it means personal sacrifice.
It makes me think of all those conscientious objectors he wrote about, refusing to fight in wars because it went against their beliefs. Talk about going against the grain, right?
Exactly. They saw that conflict, that disconnect between their faith and what the state demanded of them, and they chose their conscience. Tolstoy argues that when enough people make that choice, that courageous choice, it starts a ripple effect. Eventually, those ripples change societal norms. He called it the power of public opinion.
So you're saying that one person's act of conscience can actually help shift an entire society's values?
That's a pretty powerful thought, but how did he see that translating into something as ingrained as state violence? That seems like a whole other beast, doesn't it?
He believed that state power ultimately relies on the threat of violence to keep everything in check. And if enough people withdraw their consent to that violence, if they refuse to participate in those systems that perpetuate it, well, then the foundation of that power starts to crumble.
He wasn't talking about some overnight revolution, though, right?
No, definitely not. He knew it would be a slow burn, a gradual process, but he pointed to all these historical examples of how entire societies have undergone massive transformations in values and beliefs over time.
Like, what examples did he use? Well, look at the conversion to Christianity. That took centuries, right? But it eventually reshaped Western civilization as we know it. So it's a long game, but change is possible.
Okay, so there's hope. But it just seems like these truths of Christianity have been around for ages, but we're still so far from this nonviolent world Tolstoy envisioned. Why hasn't it happened faster? What was his take on that?
Tolstoy argued that the true essence of Christianity, the real heart of it, had been obscured, kind of buried under all this dogma and ritual and just plain misinterpretations by the very institutions that were supposed to uphold it. It's kind of ironic when you think about it.
He was really going after the whole idol worship thing, wasn't he? People so focused on relics and icons and missing the point of actually living by Christ's teachings.
Exactly. He saw it all as a distraction from the true work, the real work of spiritual growth. And it wasn't just religious institutions he criticized. He also called out the men of science, as he called them, who just dismissed Christianity as outdated. He saw a lack of self-awareness on both sides of the equation.
An equal opportunity critic. I like it. But going back to public opinion for a second, it's interesting because today we think of it as so fickle, so easily influenced. It's almost like a fad.
And yet Tolstoy recognized just how potent a force for change public opinion could be. He believed that when a critical mass of people truly grasps a new idea, it creates this undeniable shift in consciousness. It's like a wave you can't stop.
I see what you're saying.
Consider how our attitudes towards things like slavery or women's rights have evolved over time. What was once accepted as totally normal is now unthinkable. It's like we've done a complete 180.
It's like reaching a tipping point where the radical becomes, well, just common sense.
Exactly. So, to bring it back to Tolstoy's central argument, if violence is always wrong, are we moving towards a world where that becomes a universal truth? That's the real question he poses.
It's a heavy question, and it doesn't feel theoretical, It feels deeply personally relevant. At least to me it does.
It has to be personal. We can't all just become hermits, renounce our possessions, and live in isolation. That's not realistic. It's about finding a way to live these ideas out in the real world, in this complex world we all share.
So how do we even begin to bridge that gap between the world as it is and this world Tolstoy envisions? We can't all just drop everything and become like preachers of nonviolence.
Well, Tolstoy would probably say it starts a lot smaller, a lot more personally. He challenges us to look at our own lives, to really examine them.
Where are we contributing to violence, even in little ways, in ways we don't even think about?
Exactly. And how are we benefiting from systems that are built on it? It's easy to criticize the system, but are we really separate from it?
So it's this ongoing self-reflection, right? Like
Yeah.
always questioning your choices, your motivations, where you spend your money, all of it. Man, it's a lot.
It's not easy work, that's for sure. But he also says we have to have the courage of our convictions, to speak out against injustice, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it feels risky.
Yeah, and let's not forget, Tolstoy himself faced some serious consequences for his beliefs. Censorship, exile, the whole nine yards.
He walked the walk. But it's not like he expected anyone to reach some perfect state of nonviolence overnight. It was more about those small, conscious choices, those everyday acts of resistance, and the belief that they can add up to something bigger.
So maybe it's about focusing on what we can control our own actions and trusting that those ripples, those little ripples of change, they actually do matter in the grand scheme of things.
That's a big part of it. He's saying that even small acts of courage, they can chip away at a system that seems so big, so immovable.
And it's about having faith that things can change, right?
Absolutely. He really believed in the power of truth. That truth has a way of breaking through, even in the darkest of times. He wrote, and I'm paraphrasing here, but he said something like, when you recognize the truth, it sets you free.
Ah,
And I think that's something we can all hold on to, even today.
what a powerful thought to end on. If any of this resonates with you and you really want to dive deeper into these ideas, I can't recommend The Kingdom of God is Within You enough. It's a challenging read, but it's worth it.
It really is. It sticks with you. It makes you think about the world we're a part of and the choices we make each and every day. And maybe, just maybe, it inspires us to be a little braver, a little more compassionate, a little more willing to stand up for what we believe in.
Beautifully said. And on that note, thanks for joining us for this deep dive into Tolstoy's The Kingdom of God is Within You. It's been quite a journey. And until next time, keep those wheels turning, keep questioning, and keep exploring these big ideas. We'll see you on the next deep dive.